and shared with others here, and we will stop the recording at the end of the Q&A. So Gordon, please go ahead.
Well, thank you, Emily. Boy, based on the questions, I think we could just move right to the Q&A. I think everybody's got a pretty good grasp. As I look over the audience that we have today, it looks like there are a lot of you, and don't take this the wrong way, but do have a lot of experience in being a trustee. And first of all, I just want to say good morning or afternoon, and thanks to Earlham for sponsoring this and the Quaker Leadership Center. And thanks to Emily for putting it all together. And as we just heard, several of you have been trustees for many years. Others maybe just a few, and then sounds like there may be others that are considering a trustee role but haven't signed up yet. I'm just going to read a real quick definition of the role of a trustee straight out of either the dictionary or Wikipedia, wherever I got it. Managing or administrating property or finances of a trust or nonprofit with a legal obligation to administer it solely for the purposes specified. For the sake of this discussion, in governance, it pertains to managing property or assets of a local church or meeting, a yearly or quarterly meeting, a college or other nonprofit organization. Here in the Northwest, the Friends have various camps that go on either in the summer or year round. We have a retirement facility that the Quakers founded, a publishing company, so all of these have trustees that help in the governance. Many of you may actually serve in more than one role. And here in the Northwest, I served on, and still am on the George Fox University Board of Trustees as a trustee emeritus, a Northwest Yearly Meeting trustee, and I clerked that committee for many years. And then also a trustee for several local churches in Oregon. So I know that college or university trustees is not the real focus of this, but I want to touch on it just very quickly, because some of you may be college trustees or considering that. Earlham College has 22 trustees, according to their website. George Fox has around 35 and Malone 30. And what is the role of a college trustee, and how does it differ from, say, a yearly meeting or a quarterly meeting or monthly meeting? A college trustee is the guardian of the mission of the college. They should know what that mission is, and they should guard it and ensure that it continues. They ensure the financial strength of the college. They protect the academic strength, including tenure approvals. And they hire and fire the president. Beyond that, the trustee's role is not in the day-to-day management of the college. That is the role of the president and his or her cabinet. So with that, and we can answer any more specific questions later if you have some. Let's talk about a yearly meeting or quarterly meeting. And my frame of reference really is Northwest Yearly Meeting, so that's where I'm going to be kind of coming from in terms of structure and governance and so forth. Your yearly meeting might be slightly different, but I think there are a lot of similarities. Northwest Yearly Meeting covers 3 states, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. And the yearly meeting itself has a committee structure that is kind of led by what we call the Administrative Council. So basically, final decisions are made by the AC. I won't go into all the committees, but we have a separate finance committee that is responsible for budgets and financial issues, and including the 401k now, or retirement plan for pastors and yearly meeting employees. That used to be handled by the trustees, but it's shifted over to the finance folks. And then we have the trustees, which, as somebody mentioned in the role of the trustees, we are concerned with the legal and property issues of the yearly meeting and the churches. Prior to our split in the yearly meeting in 2018, we had 66 churches in the Northwest, Oregon, Idaho, and Washington. There are slightly different, some slight differences in the way property is handled, especially as it relates to churches in these states. And so the trustees need to be aware of those differences and be able to speak to them and have some expertise in those areas. I won't go into all of the examples, but obviously the trustees were very busy the year that our yearly meeting decided to split. That consumed a lot of our time and during that year. What are the important roles for trustees as in a yearly meeting? I think it's critical that we see ourselves as serving the entire yearly meeting and all of the churches or meetings that are within the yearly meeting.
And I think we train ourselves out of taking.
We need to have a frequent communication with the administrative council. We're not out there doing our own thing, but we are serving and communicating with the administrative council. As you all know, Quakers or Friends place a high value on the discernment style of governments and consensus. And so we strive for that both as trustees within our own committee and as we work with the AC on a larger level. Another really important thing, and I'm going to talk about this 2 or 3 times here in this quick presentation. I think it's very, very important at all levels of the trustee folks is that we ensure that we have the requisite experience on our committee, specifically in the real estate and legal areas. Certainly at the college level, we had attorneys on our board. We had accountants, finance people, just a very broad spectrum. And at the yearly meeting level, that is typically fairly easy to replicate as well, where you have realtors or other people that are in property management or have experience in that area. And also at least one attorney on the trustee committee, or at least access to one, because you do run into some legal issues as well. So again, ensuring that your committee has the requisite experience. Some of these are going to be repetitive, but I'm going to move on quickly to the local meeting or church. And it was evident from our meeting back in September with Emily that size does matter when you get to the local church or meeting. Obviously, a church of 500 or 1,000 people has a lot of resources, both financial resources and human resources. And it's not hard to fill a committee with the necessary experience in the trustees would be concerned with property or financial issues. Many local churches, especially smaller ones, typically combine the stewardship or finance committee and the trustees, and they oversee both. They may or may not appoint within that committee specific trustees that would sign documents and so forth, but often in small churches, those two are combined. One of the things that trustees deal with, whether you own your property or rent your property, is that becomes something that the trustees deal with. And for those of you that are in a meeting where you own your property, the building itself and the grounds can become almost an exhausting exercise in ensuring that you are caring for it and all that entails. That can almost take on a life of its own. If you're renting a building, either from another church or meeting or a school or an office building, that has its own issues in terms of ensuring that the trustees need to ensure that the meeting is protected in the rental agreement or lease agreement that you may be asked to sign before renting that property. Another issue that comes up frequently, and I'll just mention it without going into detail, but if you have other groups using your facility, whether it be a nonprofit, another church or meeting, frequently our meetings are, at that sacred hour from 11 to 12, and we may have another church that meets in the afternoon or evening in our building, or we may have a for-profit group that meets in our facility. And there are some ramifications tax-wise if you do have a for-profit business, particularly a large one, meeting in your meeting house or church. Again, even at the local meeting, we have to remember as trustees that we are serving the church, and so we need to be very willing to communicate. We need to remember that not everybody in the monthly business meeting or monthly meeting that we have for business is up to speed on all of the property and finance issues. And so we need to communicate clearly with the meeting so that when it comes time for discernment and a decision and hopefully consensus, everybody is up to speed and there's not still questions that are lingering out there. So real quickly, just to kind of sum up here in terms of the governance piece, as you all know, we as Quakers put a very high priority on the, as I've mentioned several times, the discernment and consensus process of decision-making. When I joined the George Fox Board, for instance, we used the Roberts Rules of Order back in the late 1970s, where we would make a motion, second it, and then vote. And maybe Earlham or Malone still use that, I don't know. But we converted over to the Quaker style in the early to mid 90s, and perhaps for the non-Quakers on our George Fox board, it was kind of a head scratcher. But I think they've come to really appreciate the Quaker style of reaching consensus on, particularly on issues that could be have differences of opinion or be contentious. Again, remember, as a local church trustee, that not everyone in your meeting is going to have the expertise and experience that you have. And so we need to take time in our business meetings to bring those folks up to speed. As trustees, and I'll blame myself, we have a tendency sometimes to be kind of left-brained and want to go straight to a decision rather than using the discernment and consensus process in our business meetings. Once again, I can't stress this. It's critical that you have the requisite skill and experience on your trustee committee. If you don't have, and I know when it gets down to a meeting of 15 or 20 or 25 people, and maybe many of you are related to each other, it's hard sometimes to fill your committee or your trustee positions with people that have the experience. And if you're unable to do that, then you need to rely on your yearly meeting or on your own, go out and find folks that would be willing to consult with you when you reach an issue that you may not feel like you have the experience to navigate on your own. And then lastly, I just want to touch on really quick is the whole area of conflict of interest. As trustees, I'll give you an example. When my wife and I attended a church in suburban Portland that had about 100 or 120 folks attending, my wife was on the pastoral team, and they asked me to be the clerk of the stewardship committee, which included the trustees. And I said I would do it with only one caveat, and that is that there was a co-clerk with me. And so whenever in our meetings, the discussion would turn to the pastoral staff, their compensation, or any of those kinds of things, I would leave the meeting. I would excuse myself because that would have been a conflict of interest. Even if everybody agreed, still, it would have been hard maybe for the other committee members to feel free to converse and talk openly without with me in the room. And I think that's important to recognize when that could happen, especially at the local level, but even at the early meeting and college level as well. I've had to sign conflict of interest forms actually at the college level and the early meeting level to let anybody know if I felt that I had a conflict of interest and what it was. And let me just say, just because there might be the appearance of a conflict of interest doesn't mean that you have to kind of freak out, if you will, and go to extreme measures. As long as it's disclosed and an open decision is made, and let me give you an example. Let's say your meeting or church is going to embark on a fairly aggressive building expansion remodel, or maybe you're going to build a completely new building. And there's somebody within your meeting that might have the experience and skill to do that work. As trustees, now if you're just replacing a sink in the kitchen or something, that's one thing. But if you're embarking on a major meeting house renovation, you need to take some precautions that if you decide that the person within your meeting is going to do the work, and some of those precautions would be to get outside bids to ensure that the person doing the work is accounting for all the costs. You need to think about the fact that if you embark on that and you have somebody within your meeting doing that work, what if something happens to that person and they can't finish it? And you haven't set aside enough money to go out and hire an outside contractor to finish that work. You're then all of a sudden short, and you're either going to have to borrow the money or just stop the renovation. So those are just some things to think about in terms of conflict of interest and using people within your body to do work, which can often save you a substantial amount of money, but there are some risks involved with that as well. So again, I know that many of you have a ton of experience, as much as or more than I have, and that's evident. But I'll stop right there, and then just we can have some questions and answers as we move forward. Sorry, I was talking so fast, and probably some of you was hard to keep up.
Gordon, thank you so much. Gordon had a difficult charge as our first speaker because his job was to like set the whole big broad umbrella. And in coming months, people will have much more specific topics on which to focus. As we move into a period of questions, probably less than 20 minutes, I want to specify that this is not the moment to ask your hyper-specific question, that you need this exact form that comes from the state of Texas. That is important, and we are going to make space for that at the end for the hyper-specific question. But for now, I would love to know if there's someone who has a question for Gordon that you think the answer is likely to be relevant to other friends as well. It will help if you use the electronic hand. You find that by hitting the reactions button. But if you cannot find that, it's okay to raise a physical hand. Just be persistent, because it might take me a minute to see you. Nancy, please.
Hi, Nancy Kraus. I'm at Purchase Quaker meeting, a part of New York yearly meeting. We're in just above New York City. We have probably about 100 enrolled members, but only about 20, 25 that are regularly active. And we had a recent discussion about what the number of trustees should be. When you were mentioning those college boards, those are huge boards. I mean, I know you have big institutions. My husband was involved with a Quaker school recently, which had a small Quaker school that had more than 20, 25, 30, 35 trustees, which seemed way too large for the size of the organization. So what's a good number, and should it be an odd number? And the other thing we often incorporate, our treasurer is always ex officio on trustees unless he or she happens to already be a named trustee. And then our clerk or co-clerk is usually also ex officio unless they are also named trustees. So I'm just curious about size of trustee boards. Thanks.
Well, I should have mentioned small colleges, and I put all three of those that I mentioned, Malone, George Fox, and Ehrlichman in the small category, have large boards mainly for one reason: they want money. When I was joining the board in 1978 and meeting with the president, there were three of us, I think, there, and he said at that time, "We want you for the 3 W's: work, wisdom, and wealth." And so, and I thought to myself, I don't have any of those. What am I doing even considering being on this board? But the heavy lifting on the college board is done by the administrative committee, which typically runs from 7 to 12 or 15. You mentioned an odd number. That would imply that there's going to be a 3-2 vote or 5-4 vote or something. And if you're truly following the discernment and consensus model, you would hope that you would, if it's a sharply divided situation, that perhaps that's telling you should not move forward. In our college board, even when we used Robert's Rules of Order, I don't ever recall having. There was occasionally when they would call for the vote, a or nay, there would be maybe 2 or 3 that would vote nay, but never typically more than that. There was never like a 51-49 vote, and we were going to move forward on that basis. So with a small congregation like yours, Nancy, I would say 3 or 4 trustees, 2 or 3 even, would be satisfactory. But the important thing is that you have the experience in that trustee group in property and finance and legal issues, or you have access to that outside. More than the size of the group, it would be the makeup. But I would say 3 or 4 would be more than adequate in that case.
Thanks, Gordon. I saw some people nod when you said 2 or 3 or 4, and other people look extremely alarmed. So a reminder that some of this also is contextual. What is your meeting accustomed to is actually relevant here. Let's hear Kathy's question and then Laura's, and then we'll take a time check.
I'm sorry. I'm with the Davis Friends meeting in California, and we do not. I don't know why it's been set up this way, but we have a board of directors rather than trustees. So we have a board comprised of a president, a vice president, and a secretary. And I am a retired attorney with absolutely no experience in this area. And I have been made president of the board. So I was wondering if anybody else here has that kind of experience, and if my role is any different from what we're talking about in terms of trustees.
Before you answer, Gordon, Kathy, we're going to hold on to the part about does anyone have a parallel experience to mine? Because I'll give a specific chance for people to talk about that at the end. But the question of is is there a difference between trustees and board of directors? Gordon, do you have anything to respond there?
Well, not knowing the specifics about the setup of the that she referred to, probably it's just a different name, but the roles and responsibilities would be very similar or the same. And I would think that there would be resources there in California that you could tap into to get some experience there. I know when I was I chaired the George Fox board for 5 years, and it was terrifying that first meeting. No one feels probably totally prepared to step into that role and know that they're going to be do a good job. Certainly, as an attorney, you have you're a bright person and gifted, and you'd be able to do a good job. But specifically, I don't know if there's a real difference between what you're calling a board of directors or as in the case of the institutions I mentioned, a board of trustees. Sometimes it's called the board of regents, but it's probably pretty close to the same.
Thanks. I had promised Laura could be next, so we'll go there. And then as time allows, we'll check with Catherine and then Jonathan.
Thanks. I think I can keep this kind of quick. I'm from 57th Street meeting in Chicago, and we're another rather small meeting. I think 30 to 50 enrolled members and maybe 20 active. We do own a property, a fairly large property in Hyde Park on the south side. And traditionally, I think our charter requests 3 to 4 trustees. And the only prerequisite is that you're there and can do it. But those of us currently named trustees have very, very little experience and come from very different fields. Interestingly, our charter proscribes a trustee serving in the capacity of officers such as treasurer, clerk, or co-clerk. And this is really kind of an enlightening thought to me that we should actually have people with, an attorney, if not on the board of trustees, accessible to us, or the financial people. So we haven't actually even met routinely with finance and stewardship. And I just like to hear you spill that out a little bit more. If there's more you want to say about that, or what some models might be, arguments for and against.
Well, it's not to say that that folks that have good common sense can't be a good trustees, even if they don't have the experience. But from time to time, I guess the answer would be that you would at least have the ability to recognize if you're butting up against something that is clearly beyond your experience, or may venture into a legal area, that you then go to your yearly meeting or other contacts that you might have for legal help. Obviously, nobody wants to, and excuse me if there's any attorneys on the call here, but nobody wants to pay the going rate of $400 or $500 an hour for an attorney on a simple matter. But if it truly is something that could harm your property or your structure, your meeting, that advice would be well worth it. But I would at least, from your yearly meeting or your own committee, put together a list of consultants that you could tap if you needed to, if you were coming up against something that was you felt that you just did not have the experience to deal with. I'll just give you a quick example of something we dealt with here in Oregon. Actually, in the Northwest, we had a pastor. One of our pastors had a person attending his church who ended up they found out was a convicted sex felon. sex offender and had basically rehabilitated and was coming to their church. And so he decided to put this person, to employ this person at a camp that where young kids were going to be coming for summer, a week-long summer camps. Well, somebody thought, gee, maybe, is this really a good idea? Even if perhaps the person was completely rehabilitated. So as trustees, that was handed to us, and we deliberated on that. We did talk to, I think, got outside the council and ultimately decided that no, that was not a good idea. It didn't pass the smell test or the vision test of what it might look like if you were a parent sending your kid to a camp, and this was a person who was there working on the grounds. So it's just part of it is just knowing when you might need help and being able to have a resource to go to. Does that answer your question?
Thanks, Gordon. I want to add a tiny piece to that. Laura was asking about various models and why is it that at one meeting the clerk and the treasurer might be the trustees and at another meeting that's seen as a conflict of interest. And I think that it's because the Quaker discernment process, this idea of corporate discernment and finding unity, we have some dis-ease about how that goes together with the legal requirements that some of us face of having trustees. Like, do those two things conflict? How do we help them not conflict? And different groups have come to different answers about how to deal with both the spiritual piece and the nonprofit law. I don't know that any of the answers we've come to are wrong, as long as everybody understands what the answer is in our local group and how we're doing this work together. I think there is time.
I think you're probably right, Emily. I think it probably boils down to a situation where the more roles a single person takes on, the more chance there could be for a conflict of interest. And remember, a conflict of interest is not, you may have a conflict of interest, but it still may be okay to move forward. It just needs to be acknowledged and people need to know about it. And it's really to protect the person as well as the meeting. You just don't want to find yourself in, after the fact in a real sticky situation because one or two people in your meeting were in control of too many things. Does that make sense?
I think that there's time for one more question before we go into small groups. And so I'll go to Catherine because the hand went up first.
Thanks. Catherine Alford from New York Quarterly Meeting. I've served as a trustee and now serve as clerk. I was amused when you said that, if you have a meeting of, 500 to 1,000 people, it will be easy to staff your trustees, because that has not been our experience at all. It's actually very difficult to find people both either with the expertise or even the time. And I will just note that there's a lot of gray hair on this call and that
I didn't want to say that.
Yeah, they're developing younger, and I have it too. So this is just be clear. Developing younger members of the meeting and just how to develop a bench of people who are willing to serve, feel supported in their service, which I think is a really important thing, because a lot of times we're like, you said yes, okay, fine, great, do it, without any kind of on-ramping or process to get people to be a trustee. So I'm just curious if you've had how to address this, because we experience burnout. The same friends show up over and over and over again in important roles for the quarter and in their meetings, and it's not sustainable. So we're trying to find a method of a way of engaging the community in a more sustainable and looking towards the future.
Yeah, that's a good point, Catherine. And you're probably right. I guess I just made an assumption that if you had a church of 500, you just would have more resources. And typically that's been my experience. But there needs to be a vetting process for sure before you just appoint somebody a trustee. whether you have a nominating committee or some other committee that would deliberate on the people that may be nominated to be a trustee. And there's nothing wrong with having a young person that has no experience. That's how they get experience. Add them to your trustee role. They may, as I did when I joined the George Fox board at 31, I kept my mouth shut most of the time because I did not have the experience, and I didn't want to communicate that to people by making a comment that was inappropriate. So I think it's fine to have if you have a committee of 3 and one of them is somebody that's 22, that may be a problem. But I think people need to be trained. They need to be vetted before they join the board. And you've hit on an issue that plagues every church, and that is a burnout. And the same people are the ones that are always volunteering or being tapped to serve on or lead committees. And for as long as I've been going to church, that's a problem that you deal with from time to time. Does that help at all?
It's a universal challenge.
Yeah.
Friends, thank you for this Q&A period. I think we're going to stop the recording at this point, and I'll tell you the next 2